All right, so at this stage we have our legs done, they're separated, and we have to get the cleats made that we're gonna be able to mount to the inside of the legs before we can start working on cutting out the rails. The rails are all 3/4 of an inch thick, and they're all about 2 inches wide, 1 7/8 or 2 inches. So you'd be looking for either two 4.5 inch boards, longer than what they are at 20 inches, that would make up the 4 pieces, or one board that's like 8.5 or 9 inches wide that you get all 4 of those rails out of. That's something that you can be looking for in off time if you're waiting for things to glue up, if you're waiting for a machine. You can start getting those materials out and processing them at a length longer than 20, at a width wider than what's required, and at a thickness first of 3/4 of an inch. Okay, but back to the cleats here. So the cleats are going to be 1/2 inch thick by 2 3/4 inch wide by 13 1/8 long. That is, first two numbers there, our thickness and our width, are identical to what your plans are asking for. The length, however, we have doctored because we want the length not to stick out the front and the back here, but to be contained inside of those. So 13 1/8 is the number we're going to use for that. What's the point of these cleats down below here? The cleats keep the legs flat. I think many of you have kind of noticed already that we have some warping going on with these legs in many cases. They keep them flat when they get screwed down to them, and they also prevent the legs from ever splitting. So they have a purpose, and that purpose has been discovered over the 100 and some years that the Shaker people were making this furniture. So although a lot of the students' eyes, when they look at them, they think that they are just a vestigial organ on this thing. They actually have a working purpose for this. Okay. The layout of our cleat is on the board, on the sill up there is where I have this piece here, and I also have this illustrated in the packet that I gave you for the instructions. This is very similar to what we did in class for our hands-on assignment after we had started talking about 3 view orthographic drawings. We have an 1/8 inch edge down here. Our holes are located 13/16 in from each edge here. So from the ends and from the edges. So where those lines cross, those 13/16 lines cross, is where we have our holes. There are 6 of them. So the middle ones are going to be at the center of 13 1/8. So you take 13 1/8 divided by 2, and that is where the line is going to be for our center holes there. Okay? Our angles come from 7/16, and that's these numbers, 7/16 and 3/8 are numbers. So that's 7/16 there, and this is 3/8 here, leaving 1/8 then for that flat on the bottom. Those numbers come directly from the plans that we have on making the step stool there. We can't simply use a 45-degree router bit for cutting those because it's not a 45-degree angle. It's 7/16 by 3/8. So it's an angle other than what I would have a router bit for. Later on, when we do the steps here, these chamfers are 3/16 by 3/16, which is 45 degrees. So we'll use a router bit for cutting these later on, but for our cleats, we're going to be doing it identically to how we had done that with the pieces that we had in class. The edges here, the angle is going to be cut with a hand plane, and the ends are going to be rough cut with the bandsaw and then finalized with the disc sander. One thing that becomes more important with this one than the one we did in class prior is that the one in class was 3/4 of an inch thick, and at 3/4 of an inch it did a really good job of staying on its edge when we took it to the sander. If you have the occasion where perhaps you've already cut these angles on the sides here, which is not advised, you want to do the end angles first. End angles first. I lost my train of thought there for a second there. First, identify where all the holes are first, because once you put the angle on there, it's very difficult to get a square that doesn't ride up the edge here. So map out the entire board, this entire board, before you begin cutting any angles on this. You want to have that square edge there when you sand those other angles on also. So we want to identify our holes first, and then we want to do our end angles here so we have a square part to sit on. If you have already cut the side edges on, it's not going to sit square for you on the sander. You're going to have to bring this square to a 90. And you have to hold that against the board to keep it from tilting as you're going ahead and sanding that last angle on there. Okay? So let me quickly just show you how we're going to lay this out. But it is identical to what we've already done in class here. I want to come in 13/16 and 7/16. Two sets of lines going all the way around here. So I'm going to set my combination square to 13/16, cover up 13/16 mark. Then I want to set the piece in a vise. And then at that 13/16, I am going to go ahead and run my lines around. Okay, I also want to put them on the ends. Notice how I'm flipping my square over as I go here, because if I'm coming in this direction here, eventually it becomes too wobbly to get that end line there. So I'll flip it so I have a greater reference. Okay, that's my 13/16 line. Next one's the 7/16 line. It's the same thing. Okay, down here. So these intersections here are where we're having holes put in, and these intersections here are where we're sloping this down to that 1/8 that we're going to have here. So I'll set my square to 1/8. And on the bottom side of the cleat, I'll draw that 1/8 line. This is probably the most important layout tool that we have in the shop here, a combination square, because it serves us so many different purposes in this. We're going to take that 7/16 line here and this line, we're going to connect them, and that is going to be the angle right here. That'll be the waist area that we're cutting off for our end angles to this. Okay? Don't cut any angles until you have your lines all drawn out. Now I still have to put on a 7/16 line here and one here as well. Okay? I generally will just take my finger across like that and draw them onto the piece like that, using my middle finger as a guide. So you want that all laid out before you start this. We still have to also find center, remember, and then we're going to have a line here and a line here at center, and that's where our circle holes are going to go there. That's going to get attached to the inside of your leg. Let me quickly show you how you're going to determine that. So I have two pieces here. I want to determine what's going to be the outside of each of these. So I like this one here, it has all heartwood, so that's going to be the outside. That cannot be the outside, otherwise I'll have two of the same legs when I put cleats on them. So it has to be the opposite side here, so this has to be out, right? If those are out, that means that the inside of these legs is where my cleats are going to be, where I'm going to attach those. The inside area here, all the inside face, draw some hash marks on here. And you'll use that as a way to see that you've sanded the entire thing. So we're going to use an orbital sander, and we're going to sand the inside of these faces. Once we sand that, and I'll show you sand that in just one moment. Also on the front board is a guide for placing our cleats on here. So this sits at the bottom here. Our cleat sits in that opening. And then we just get this centered to the eye. You don't have to use any measurements for this, but center it to the eye there, just like so. If you, when you put this guide on, see that your arc went higher than that, meaning that you would see something like that. Then we have to use some other material here to space your cleat higher so that it's not sitting down below the arc. So if that's the case, let me know and I'll help you find a piece that's going to lift up that cleat so it won't be sitting covering up that arch at the bottom there. Okay? All right. I'm going to show you how to sand it in a minute.